The Barbarian is obviously the strongest character in Diablo 2, just look at those biceps. And in this video we're pumping those muscles to the max on a playthrough from level 1 all the way through hell, by putting every single stat point into strength. I named my hero after the biggest muscle on the human body, and so began a new adventure. I rushed out of the rogue encampment with the excitement of a gym bro on arm day. A lot of my recent challenges have started with me having to loot chests and look under rocks for gold to overcome my starting conditions, but this guy could just run up to the first fallen and start swinging his starting axe. I guess what I'm saying is that starting the game normally was a nice change of pace. The rules for this run are about as simple as it gets, but let's take a quick look at what it means. Most gear in the game require a certain amount of strength to be equipped, and it also increases the damage you do with melee weapons. In Barbarian terms, big strength good. Dexterity is also required to wear some gear, but it's not as common as a requirement as strength is. It also increases your defense, your block chance with a shield, your damage with some weapons, and perhaps most importantly, your attack rating, which gives you a better chance of hitting your enemies. In contrast to my dexterity only run, I would have less of a problem equipping most gear, and I thought that it would be easy to compensate for the lack of dexterity in other ways. That turned out to be harder than I expected, and my chance to hit enemies turned out to be a big problem, but more on that later. Vitality is the most important stat and the least important stat at the same time. As long as you're alive, your life doesn't matter, but when you run out, you die. I also intend to stick to a melee brawler playstyle, since I think that's what the world's strongest barbarian would do, so a small life pool will without a doubt be a liability. And finally, energy. One of the best early game weapons is not an axe, not a sword, but a scepter. Even without being able to benefit from the paladin skill bonuses, the 6 to 11 base damage outclasses most other weapons you can find this early, so I picked up 2 of them from Akara. And they are technically mace type weapons, so they do benefit from the Barbarian's mace mastery skill. With 2 scepters I made short work of anything I encountered, from Rakanishu in the stony field, through the underground passage where a lucky combat run helped me out a lot, and into the Forgotten Tower where I hope to find some good loot, including runes from the Countess. When I was sketching out the first part of the challenge, I guessed that it would be very easy until the catacombs, so I tried speeding through to get there as fast as possible. And while I did deal a lot of damage to enemies and didn't really have a problem with hitting them, already in the Forgotten Tower my lack of life was starting to become a problem. I was bested in melee combat by these goatmen and had to run away after exchanging just a few attacks with them, and then heal up before going in for another 2 or 3 attacks. I guess a pack of goatmen with a might aura is about as scary as it gets for this part of the game, but this wasn't an outlier. Every elite pack of monsters was a serious threat to my tiny life bulb, so it looked like the challenge aspect of this run was kicking in sooner than I expected, and I started using hit and run tactics as my main way of fighting. Just like my Barbarian could use some better protection against the evil forces in the Forgotten Tower, you and I could probably use some better protection against evil forces on the internet. And while my Barbarian stubbornly continues to suffer for the sake of the challenge, let me tell you what this video sponsor, NordVPN, can do for us. The internet is a beautiful place, but today, cybersecurity and online privacy are serious concerns. NordVPN encrypts your data and hides your IP address when you're connected to the internet, and NordVPN's Threat Protection Pro does even more by warning you about potential scams, straight up blocking malware and trackers, and more. I'm pretty careful about what and where I browse online, but let's be honest, I'm no cybersecurity expert, so having that extra protection is a good idea, and it brings me peace of mind. With NordVPN you are not only safer, but you are also able to access region-locked content online. Having a series you want to watch be unavailable on your favorite streaming service just because of your location sucks, but with the click of a button you can connect to a server in another region and access their full library of content. Imagine playing Diablo 2 but the Barbarian mercenaries with cool names like Ragnar and Ulf were only available in Scandinavia. You'd be missing out. NordVPN protects you online and gives you the freedom to control your connection to the internet, and it's really easy to use. If you want to check it out for yourself, I have a great deal for you. Go to nordvpn.com/Zarfen to get it. Giving it a try is risk-free with NordVPN's 30-day money-back guarantee, and by using my link, you're helping the channel. Again, that is nordvpn.com/Zarfen, and there's also a link in the video description. Thanks to NordVPN for sponsoring this video, and now, back to slaying demons with my big bulky Barbarian. After that I went to rescue Deckard Cain, but then decided against it. And then I continued to drive by bonk enemies through the barracks and the jail, making sure to pick up the Horadric Malus for Charsi. I had to fight the smith for the hammer, whose bulky body eclipsed my own, and it really showed in his power as each hit took away about half of my life. But with logs for legs he couldn't move quickly, so I could hit and run my way to victory once again. I had put most of my skill points into double swing, which gives a bit of a boost to attack rating, but more importantly it attacks very fast with 2 weapons. That meant more damage output for sure, but what I was mostly interested in was attacking first. You see, with my low life it was very easy for enemies to put me into hit recovery, causing the flinching animation you can see happening to my Barbarian on screen. And when that happened I was locked into the animation and couldn't move or attack, and it can even interrupt an attack swing in progress, completely cancelling the attack. So it was important for me to attack first. The skill doesn't get any faster with more skill points, but I still found it worth investing heavily in because the mana cost goes down with every level, and my tiny mana pool could not handle mana intensive battle tactics. I clobbered demons with my scepters and did my best to avoid enemy attacks and reached the catacombs level 4 where the first act boss was waiting for me. I was level 13, which is a bit on the low end for taking on Andariel for me, but not anything unheard of. My double swing was level 8 now, sporting a very manageable mana cost of 0.2 per attack. With one more skill point it actually becomes completely free to use, meaning I could always use double swing even if I ran out of mana. I was also using Taunt, which can force enemies to walk towards you. Very useful to stop spellcasters and archers from attacking, and also to lure enemies towards you to clear them out a few at a time, which I made good use of before taking on Andariel. Bracing myself for the fight against Andariel with less than 80 life and no poison resistance, my only plan was to try and rush her with double swing and burst her down, but holy poison cloud was I not ready to take her on. One of her attacks put me down to just 30 life and left me poisoned, so I had to run away immediately. I went to Akara and drank the entire encampment's rations of antidote potions to temporarily boost my poison resistance. Filled with Akara's brews, I ran in for a second attempt, and while I had to resort to some mid-battle potion management, I was dealing damage to Andariel almost as fast as she was damaging me, and Andariel didn't have access to any anti-bonk potions, so in the end, I won the fight. Not bad at all things considered, but this was the very first of many boss fights to come, and without vitality I was going to have a hard time scaling my life total to match the increase in monster damage. When I arrived in Act 2 I was surprised to find that Deckard Cain had been rescued by someone else.
Oh, blessings on the rogues.
Even though I abandoned him, I was happy to see him and was hoping there were no hard feelings, but the old man held a grudge and was now charging me to identify my items for me. And just to be clear, this isn't some joke I edited into the video, the game actually punishes you for not saving Deckard Cain this way. And for some reason I really like that, because what kind of asshole would you have to be to leave Deckard Cain to rot in a cage? Wait. Being a greedy loot goblin, I started Act 2 as I always do, by shopping for gear to increase my magic find. It's not only because I like the dopamine of finding cool items, but I really do think it's the best strategy for a lot of challenges, maximizing my chances for rare drops for as long as I can get away with it. I bought a pair of gloves with 22 magic find and some poison resistance, and those sure would have been handy to have against Andariel. A matching pair of boots for another 22 magic find, and I had also found 4 chipped topazes, which I used to make one of my favorite items in the game, the gemmed skull cap for another 18 magic find. And finally I bought a 3-socketed breastplate where I put my final 2 topazes. I also bought a belt with a 5% chance to cast Frost Nova when hit, which really is an underrated early game crowd control stat that is very easy to shop for in Act 2. This put me at 80% increased chance of finding magic items in total, which is very solid this early. But I had this lingering feeling that I might not be able to keep all my gear slots except my weapons and my belt slot dedicated to pure magic find for very long. I should probably have hired a mercenary as well, but I guess I forgot about it because I headed straight for the sewers, and here the next issue with my blind quest for maximum strength began to show. I guess I was a little underleveled, and skeletons are among the hardest enemies to hit, but my chance to hit enemies with double swing was already less than 80%, and with my normal attack it was only 74%. When I play a character that needs to hit enemies, I always end up with a decent investment in dexterity for this very reason. It's such a reliable way of increasing your attack rating. But for this character, getting my chance to hit to a respectable level was going to be a tricky problem throughout the entire challenge. And the irony of this complaint just after filling my gear with only magic find is not lost on me. What can I say, I have just developed a habit of always going all in on magic find in Act 2 of normal. Once a loot goblin, always a loot goblin. After defeating Radamant in the sewers, I acquired the Book of Skill. I didn't really know how to read it, but just opening it filled me with the power of knowledge. I mean the power of a free skill point. Before venturing out into the endless sand outside the city walls, I remembered that mercenaries existed, and I hired Emilio who would grant the both of us the Blessed Aim Aura for a passive increase to attack rating. The bonus is percentage based, so I would still need to get my base attack rating up, but this was certainly going to help me hit my enemies. I bought Emilio some more Frost Nova gear to help slow our enemies down, and a random spear in which I put a chipped skull. Not an amazing stick by any means, but I was hoping that a little bit of lifesteal could help keep Emilio alive for longer, and the longer he stayed alive, the safer my life pool would be. I also picked up a new pair of scepters with higher base damage. My strong arms were longing for bigger and heavier weapons, but for now these wimpy paladin ornaments were hard to beat from a damage perspective. Just outside of town, after the first elite pack I defeated, I found a nice rare for Emilio. More damage, higher lifesteal and some bonus stats on top. I was a little jealous that he got this nice upgrade right after joining the adventure, but oh well, we were a team after all, and the attention that Emilio drew from enemies was very helpful, and allowed me to focus on other activities, like taking out healers, or, surviving. I grabbed the Horadric cube from the Halls of the Dead. While recording this, I was streaming a crafting only challenge at the same time, so cube shenanigans were on the top of my mind, so I was definitely going to try and make good use of the cube. Then while identifying loot back in town, I also noticed this small charm. A +7 life small charm isn't usually something to celebrate, but for me it was an increase of like 8% of my life total for just one inventory space. A deal I would take any day. With the help of Emilio, solid damage from my new scepters boosted by my high strength and killing lots of enemies to start catching up on levels, Act 2 wasn't too difficult. I still had to be mindful about incoming damage though, especially around these high voltage piñatas in the form of beetles. A few ill-timed attacks could drain my life pool at an uncomfortable speed, nearly killing me several times. But I swallowed my pride and let Emilio lead the charge against the beetles, and we made it through every encounter. After defeating this mind-enchanted pack of snakes, which is some absolute nightmare fuel for a low-life character like mine, I hit level 18 and unlocked an important skill for this Barbarian, Battle Cry. It debuffs enemies around you, and I was obviously a bit overconfident in trying to show it off against 20 skeletons at once, but it does reduce enemy damage and defense, helping both my survivability and my chance to hit enemies, which were my two main struggles. In the Arcane Sanctuary I found the right path on the first try, and that had not happened to me in a long time. I was so excited that I temporarily forgot about my tiny life pool, and the summoner summoned an ice spell that instantly killed me. To be fair, I was not fully healed when I took the hit. But that ice spell didn't even stop on impact, it just went straight through me like a cannonball through a sheet of paper. When we returned after a long walk, I waited until he targeted Emilio and then quickly ran up to backstab him before he could shoot another spell at me, and then proceeded into the Canyon of the Magi. I did not feel ready to take on Duriel in my current state, so I took some time to clear out the Canyon of the Magi and some of the fake tombs for extra levels. Not that those areas were safe to farm or anything, but I felt like I needed a little boost before the next boss. During this grind, Emilio hit level 19, and that's when I decided to start making some magic with the cube. One of my favorite cube recipes, a belt, a Chris dagger, a staff and a diamond. This combines to a Savage Polearm type weapon, which can be quite strong for this part of the game, and this Savage Polearm was showing some really good damage numbers, higher than anything else that I would be able to find this early. I was considering if maybe I should use it for myself, but with 127 strength and all other stats at base value, that dexterity requirement was just way out of my reach. While trying to get some upgrades, I also went back to Charcy to ask her to imbue a mace for me, as part of a quest reward for that hammer I collected for her back in Act 1, but her imbue window was missing a button. Perhaps she had also heard about the whole leaving deck arcane in a cage thing. Though exiting the game and starting a new one fixed the problem, but that is one weird bug that I have never encountered before. The rare mace was looking okay, but didn't really outperform either of my current weapons, so I decided to move on to Duriel in my current setup. Duriel in normal is known to be a brick wall for melee characters, with a slowing cold aura and quick hard-hitting attacks, and that was certainly the case for this character. Emilio fell quickly upon entering the chamber, and unfortunately I quickly followed. We regrouped in town and I gave both Emilio and myself some thawing potions for a temporary boost to cold resistance. When we returned to Duriel, that proved to be quite helpful. It didn't make the fight easy by any means, because a few attacks was all it took to take me down, if I was a little slow on my feet when he went after me instead of Emilio, though Emilio was significantly more tanky. Duriel was a big challenge for this character, and even though I only had a 66% chance of hitting Duriel with every attack, we were eventually able to defeat him. Duriel dropped a green pair of boots. Those are some very nice early game boots with faster run speed and a good chunk of fire resistance. And in a rare moment of clarity about the situation, I actually replaced my Magic Find boots with these, choosing actual stats over Magic Find. This is what you call character progression, not only for my Barbarian, but for me personally as well. In Act 3 a new weapon type opened up, which I was very interested in. The town blacksmith could now sell warhammers. They were slower than what I was currently using, but compensated with much higher damage. After a few runs in and out of town to refresh his inventory, I managed to buy 2 warhammers with decent damage stats. This resulted in a good damage boost, and running around with 2 big hammers looks pretty cool if you ask me, and certainly a lot cooler than a barbarian using 2 scepters. They say that if all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. I don't really know what that is supposed to mean, but to me this was a great strategy. Nails or demons, these hammers were definitely the right tool for the job. The drop in attack speed was noticeable, but with double swing I didn't find them to be that slow, and my damage output was really good, one hitting some smaller enemies and needing just a couple of hits even for the big tree monsters. In the interest of progressing the challenge and with the absence of lightning beetles, I hammered my way through Act 3 like a carpenter trying to clock out early on a Friday afternoon. The only noteworthy character progression of the act was finishing the first quest for the reward of the Potion of Life, giving a casual 20% increase to my life total for free. Yes please, thank you very much. I also found a stronger Warhammer from Battle Maiden's Arena, and just the fact that it was called Brutal Warhammer made me eager to use it. With a deja vu to my last video, just as I engaged the High Council of Travancore, I hit level 24, which unlocked 3 new skills for me, and just as I was about to engage the High Council of Travancore, I hit level 24, and that's the level when I unlocked an important skill for this low-life Barbarian, Battle Orders. That's a warcry that increases the life and mana of all allies in range, and is a staple skill of any Barbarian. Since the bonus is percentage based, you really want a decent life pool to begin with to make the most out of this skill, which I did not. But on the other hand, since I had very limited ways of increasing my life pool, building into battle orders was one of the easiest, most accessible ways of doing so, even if the total amount would be far less than that of a normal Barbarian. The skill only lasts for a limited time though, and on lower levels the duration is not long at all. This big boost to life hinged on me remembering to cast it every now and then, and if you've ever watched one of my live streams, you know what a liability that can be. Just as the dexterity only boason from my last video, I was facing the classic glass cannon conundrum. I was dealing a lot of damage, smashing any enemy down in quick fashion, but I was not able to take much incoming damage at all. And while the boason could utilize the ranged advantage of a bow, being a melee brawler made me unable to completely avoid damage. I had to dance in and out of combat, trading blows with monsters and then quickly try to heal up before going in again. In the Durance of Hate I was properly introduced to the low-life warrior's worst enemy, dolls. These small undead menaces are not only fast, they also explode when you kill them, with the potential to burst you down real quick. In normal difficulty the explosion isn't that strong though. Don't get me wrong, they are absolutely terrifying, and I was left with only 5 life after some bad timing, when me and Emilio took care of a pack of elite dolls together. But if these were bad, imagine the dolls I would have to face in the later difficulties. The next major roadblock was Mephisto, and I did not know how to approach his strong magic attacks with low life and even lower resistances. And yeah, I could maybe have tried to getting some resistances instead of running around with only magic find, but it wasn't like I had found any great defensive gear and just thrown them away. I remember to cast battle orders and then went into battle together with Emilio. My friend fell quickly, but I stayed in the fight, and things were looking alright, well, at least until Mephisto used his ice ball attack. Okay, let's rewatch that part. I had battle orders up and I had my cold resistance boosted by thawing potions. I wasn't at full life thanks to Mephisto's poison, but my life was still higher now than my max life without the boost from battle orders. And still, one ice ball was all it took. Ouch. And it was very hard to dodge his magic as a melee fighter too, so I had no other plan than to try again. I danced around his spells a few times to make sure I applied Battle Cry, and I made sure to bring every purple rejuvenation potion I had, since those instantly heal you for 35%. And with hammer swinging and fingers crossed, I did manage to defeat Mephisto. Now I don't mind dying in a challenge like this, but I don't like to use death as a strategy for progress, so if I hadn't gotten the message earlier, this was my wake-up call that I really needed to change up my gear for survivability. But as I say that, Mephisto did drop a unique armor, and maybe he wouldn't have done so if I hadn't carried so much magic find. The unique was Hawkmail, but unfortunately it was ethereal, meaning it cannot be repaired. This was such a bummer because this armor has the cannot be frozen stat. That stat is very hard to come by and would have been so useful for this character, as being slowed by cold damage made me attack and run a lot slower. Not only lowering my damage output, but making escaping harder as well. Though being ethereal didn't mean that it was completely unusable, just that it had an expiration date, so I equipped it for now, reluctantly sacrificing 27 MF on the armor slot. I also picked up a belt with 22 lightning resistance from Halbu, replacing my Frost Nova belt, as well as another brutal warhammer to match the one I found in Act 3. With my new gear, my defensive stats looked a little better, not great, but definitely an improvement compared to before, and the raw skull-crushing damage of my hammers were still holding up great in Act 4, so for now I was back on track with progress through the game. And the Hawkmail came in clutch soon after putting it on, as I encountered the corrupted angel Isuel, who has an arsenal of annoying cold attacks that didn't phase me at all this time. I took Isuel down because of the quest reward of 2 free skill points, but Isuel himself dropped a rare ring for me, which was actually really solid. Excuse me, can you please let me look at my loot in peace? Okay, as I was saying, a really solid ring, some extra attack rating to help me hit my enemies, a big chunk of lightning resistance, almost doubling my total, and a little bit of magic find to make sure I actually equipped it. On my way to Diablo I visited the Hellforge. Usually I care mostly about the rune, but this time it was all about the gems for me. I got a perfect sapphire and 2 flawless rubies, and that was absolutely great, exactly the gem types I was hoping for. And as I was about to head into the Chaos Sanctuary, without a doubt the scariest place in the game so far, let me show you why I wanted those gems. I hinted at it earlier when I first found the cube, but now that I had some gems it was time to start crafting. Unlike in my crafting only run, I had found several jewels by just playing through the game, and after brute forcing a couple of gem shrines outside of town to upgrade my rubies to perfect, I had everything I needed to craft a few items with big potential. Without going too deep into crafting mechanics, you can basically use the cube to create a rare item with a few fixed stats. For example, by cubing a blunt weapon, like this hammer, together with a jewel, a terrune and a perfect sapphire, I could create a new hammer with 35 to 60% enhanced damage, a chance to cast Frost Nova when hit, some damage reflection and between 1 to 4 random additional stats. Which is why I said earlier that I had big potential, because if I got a random damage increasing stat on top of the fixed one, I could be looking at a very strong weapon, but if I get a low fixed roll and only bad stats from my random rolls, it would not be better than my current hammers. And the first craft turned out okay, decent damage roll but not better than what I was already using. The chance to cast Frost Nova and the chance to cause monsters to flee were some nice extra utility. In general, having a chance to cause monsters to flee is very annoying for a melee character, because you end up having to chase your enemies down. But for this flimsy character, I chose to view it as extra crowd control. And then for the next 2 crafts that I was really excited about, a couple of blood crafts. First the helm, which was guaranteed some lifesteal, some extra life and some deadly strike, which is just like critical strike in that it gives you a chance to deal double damage. And this craft turned into a really solid helm. Medium rolls on the predetermined stats, but 2 out of the 3 random stats were extra resistances, which would be very welcome. Though a downside of getting several random stats on a craft is that it will increase the level requirement, and I wouldn't be able to wear this until level 31, but it was going to be a nice upgrade in 6 levels. And then finally the gloves, which would get life and lifesteal just like the helm, and then crushing blow. And these were really nice too. Only 1 random stat, which was a small amount of magic find, but at least that made me happy, and a low roll on the +2 life, but even 11 extra life was a significant boost to me, and then perfect rolls on the lifesteal and the crushing blow. 10% crushing blow meant that I would have a 10% chance to take away a fraction of enemy's current life with every attack, and with a fast hitting attack like double swing, this would be a mean boss killer, and getting my first bit of lifesteal was really nice too with my high damage output. With some new gear with actual stats on them, I went back to my quest for Diablo and entered the Chaos Sanctuary. The melee enemies here dealt a lot of damage, and the Oblivion Knights shot elemental projectiles and cast curses, which could turn a challenging encounter into a nightmare. And the taunt skill, which I had been using to shut down any annoying mage enemy so far, did nothing against the Oblivion Knights. But by now I was used to the chaotic high-octane playstyle of the melee glass cannon. Though that clip was a little bit of a show I put on, in reality it was much safer to take the measured approach of making enemies come to me, try to draw them apart and take calculated encounters while keeping a path for retreat open. And with the 3 P's of progress, potions, patience and the pummeling of hammers, I forced my way through to Diablo. Taking down the final Seal Guardian, I found a green set cap just as Diablo was summoned. This was not really anything compared to the helm I just crafted, but I still couldn't use that yet, and in comparison to my gemmed skull cap, this was objectively better. Well, maybe apart from how it looks. The Diablo fight was by far the most difficult encounter yet. His spells were deadly, especially his lightning beam, even with my high lightning resistance, because that is part lightning, part physical and part overpowered. And since I only had melee attacks, I had to expose my life pool to Diablo to get any damage in. When I originally started this challenge, I thought strength only was going to be a lot easier than when I beat the game with only dexterity. After all, no dexterity is much less restrictive than no strength when it comes to gear requirements. But somehow I failed to consider the other part of the challenge. A ranged Amazon versus a melee Barbarian. A ranged glass cannon has to walk on nails around dangerous situations, but a melee glass cannon has to run over those nails and straight into the dangerous situations. But even though it was very intense, the fight against Diablo actually went much better than I expected. Partially because I was a bit lucky and he didn't use the lightning attack too often, and partially because I dealt damage to him so fast that the fight didn't last very long. To his credit, I will admit that he got me a couple of times, but I do so reluctantly because unlike when I died to Duriel, this time it felt like a 100% skill issue. Even if the window for me to do so was very short, I should have been able to run away from the lightning when he used it. I guess I'm getting older and my reflexes aren't what they used to be. After all, I am almost a quarter of a century older now than when I first battled Diablo in the original Diablo 2, while Diablo hasn't aged a day. Oof, let's not go further in that direction, but instead celebrate the victory and move on to Act 5. Right away I noticed that many of my swings were whiffing air instead of crushing skulls, and upon further inspection my chance to hit even regular enemies outside of town had dropped to just over 60% per attack, and that was really bad. I took this as a sign that I was underleveled. It might also have been a sign that I was lacking attack rating, but it was easier to do something about the level situation, so when I reached the first waypoint I took a break from questing and farmed my old reliable when it comes to easy and predictable grinding in challenge runs, Eldritch the Rectifier. He's relatively easy to kill, he always spawns in the same location close to a waypoint, and most importantly, he requires very little attention to farm. Some easy farming was definitely a nice change of pace, but there was something I had not considered. To apply Battle Cry to as many enemies as possible at the same time, I was leaping into the middle of the pack, and that made me soak up a lot of attacks every time I killed him. That itself wasn't a problem since they couldn't damage me fast enough to kill me, but when the yellow armor icon appeared in the top right corner, I was reminded that I was wearing an ethereal hawkmail armor. Time to really start looking for my next armor, I guess. And both the replacement and my hawkmail's demise came sooner than expected. Just 2 runs after I first got the warning about armor durability, I found a rare plate mail from Eldritch. And that was a really decent armor with 21 lightning resistance and 30 fire resistance. Not much else to ask for from a body armor at this point. Well, except a nice chunk of +2 life of course, but beggars can't be choosers. And as my armor broke completely while I was identifying this new one, I was definitely not in a position to complain. Eldritch was really good to me. On the very next run he dropped a green plated belt. That is from the Saigon set, and even without any supporting set pieces, this belt has 20 life and 20 resistance. Exactly what this character needed. Gold was building up fast by selling all of the loot from Eldritch, so I decided to spend about half of it trying to gamble for weapon upgrades. Would the gold have been better spent on gambling defensive upgrades? Probably yes, but have you considered that we might get more damage? I gambled a massive warhammer for a little more damage than my brutal ones. Both great names for hammer weapons though. And then I got a rare which was also an upgrade. Not too impressive when it comes to secondary stats, but still good. So I got 2 new hammers from this grind too. Not the most significant upgrades, but it was definitely noticeable. I very much enjoyed this grind, so I stayed for a while. I hit level 30, pushing my strength to 183, completely dwarfing my other stats. At 30 I also unlocked 2 very good skills. The first was Battle Command, a warcry which increases all skill levels by 1. Additional levels only increases the duration, so this is the definition of a 1-point wonder skill, and it is a no-brainer for any barbarian. The second skill was Natural Resistance, a passive skill which increases all resistances. A very strong skill, and to my delight, in contrast to all the warcry buffs, this is completely passive, meaning that I couldn't forget to apply it. And then I hit level 31. I had farmed Eldritch for 6 additional levels, which were definitely gonna help me by themselves, with most points going into battle orders for a bigger life boost. But my goal was to finally equip the helm I crafted before. Goodbye strange looking hat, thanks for the magic find. And welcome to Imp Cowl, a proper metal helm with a little bit of everything that a warrior could ask for. The couple of hours or so that I spent on this grind were not progressing me in the questline at all, but they had led to significant progression for my character with several levels and some nice loot. An investment in the future, one might say, like a man hitting the gym in the present, so that other men will compliment him on his size in the future. My max life had now crossed 300 with battle orders on. That might not be an impressive number for a barbarian, but I already had a higher life total in Act 5 of normal than what my dexterity only Amazon had at the end of Hell. My chance to hit enemies had also improved, though it was still not great by any means, and sooner or later I would really need to improve on this. It was somewhat made up for by the combination of quick double swings and high damage, so I didn't really feel like I was suffering from the misses too much yet, except when I was slowed of course, and ever since Hawkmail broke, fighting cold enemies was a major pain. With this newfound power and sturdiness, I hammered my way through the act. I made sure to pick up the Scroll of Resistance as a quest reward for saving Anya from the frozen river. I wasn't really hurting for resistances at the time, but as I was getting closer and closer to the next difficulty and the resistance penalty that would come with that, it was a worthwhile detour. But other than that, I went straight for the main quests. I arrived at the Ariat summit where I had to defeat the Ancients, 3 of my barbarian ancestors. They were skillful warriors, but in a competition between barbarians, my skewed stat build completely overpowered them. The rate at which I depleted their health bars took all the barbarians by surprise, even me, and within a single minute I had defeated them all. And as a sign of disrespect, I bounced my way into the Worldstone Keep. I was prepared to have to struggle towards the end of the act, but finishing normal turned out to be a bit anticlimactic, which probably had something to do with the 2-hour leveling grind at Eldritch. I was taking this character to hell though, so I didn't let this show of power get to my head. The really difficult parts were still all ahead of me. I clobbered Bale down with a mere 52% chance to hit. Uncomfortably low, but then again, Bale is one of the hardest monsters to hit. I claimed my victory over Bale and then went straight on to Nightmare difficulty. With a serviceable life pool and my recent victory in mind, I was confident that I would make quick progress in Nightmare. And it was fine, but not trivial. My high damage was still my only redeeming quality, which kept me going. I had to kite any difficult enemy as I couldn't sustain the barrage of incoming damage while surrounded, and my chance to hit had solidified itself around the 70% level. And this was including the bonus from my Mercenary's Blessed Aim Aura, and against some enemies it went as low as 50%. 50! It was a sad sight to behold, but I was determined to make some progress. If I stopped to grind for upgrades in every single act, this would take forever. I didn't see much in the way of character improvements outside of a few levels, but it was also not truly needed as I made it to Andariel pretty quickly. And Andariel wasn't too easy nor too hard. I could barely hit her, but I could also sustain her damage with some tactical retreats and massive potion usage. I defeated her eventually and was greeted with two unique mace-type weapons. The flail was interesting, having some very unique stats, the slow on hit in particular, but the base damage was just not good enough, and the required 35 dexterity was a number I could only dream of. But the other drop though, oh boy, the unique Great Maul Steel Driver. A big dumb hammer, the perfect item for a character such as mine, and with the 40% increased attack speed it would not suffer as much from the typical drawback of such heavy weaponry, the slow attack speed. Now the enhanced damage roll was just 1% shy of being anti-perfect, which truly was a shame, but 151 enhanced damage was still a lot, especially on a high base damage weapon such as this. What was really holding this character back was his survivability and his chance to hit, not his damage. But this hammer spoke to me like the One Ring to Gollum. Could I really resist such power on a run where I was going all in on strength? Against better judgment, I decided to respec and change up my entire build to use this greatest of great mauls. I went with Concentrate as my new main skill for a nice boost to both damage and attack rating, and the defense bonus was perhaps something I could make use of too, if I were to really stack defense with heavy armor. Concentrate also has the bonus of being uninterruptible, which was actually really good for this character, because that meant that once I started a swing of the hammer I could not be interrupted by taking damage and going into hit recovery, something that had happened more for this character than most, due to his low life pool. To test my new weapon out I repeated Andariel, and while I was still struggling to hit her, when my hammer did land a blow, the impact to her health bar was really significant. And Andariel was really showering me with loot, as on the second kill she dropped 2 more uniques, but this time it was 2 swords, none of which seemed too useful to me. But the rare helm that she dropped, which I didn't even identify right away, was really interesting. Some decent stats but with low rolls, but then 2 sockets. Where I would usually fill something like this with runes for resistances, this was also an opportunity for more attack rating, by socketing my 2 best diamonds into it for another 160 base attack rating, which would get boosted even higher by all my attack rating bonuses. With the new hammer and more attack rating, I was starting to become the big, strong, demon-smashing juggernaut that I dreamt of becoming when I started this character, and I made short work of anything that Act 2 of Nightmare threw at me. Well, provided I didn't die first, that is, and I had my fair share of close calls. All damage, no survivability, a true glass cannon. I found an Amrune in the desert. I had been looking for an amulet upgrade and this was a chance to make one. My only perfect gem at the time was a perfect ruby, and together with the Amrune I could craft a blood amulet for some guaranteed life, lifesteal and faster run speed. All very useful stats, and this was blessed with great random stats on top. 42 mana was very nice to have because I was casting a lot of spells now between my Warcries, and with Concentrate now costing mana compared to the free to use double swing I was using before. And of course 14 to all resistances, very solid. I bashed my way to Duriel, who was surprisingly easy, though I must confess that it was all thanks to Emilio being able to stay alive to tank the worm, because any time that he turned his attention to me I could only soak up a few hits before I had to retreat. But just after finishing my very last health potion, we managed to take him down. And he dropped a really nice item, or well, that depends on your point of view I guess. Gold Rep gives 30% Magic Find, which is not usually available from the belt slot. I would lose out on some really good defensive stats from Saigons, so it was probably not worth it, all things considered. Though I convinced myself that because I was already at the max fire resistance cap for Nightmare, the added attack speed made Gold Rep the right choice. But in reality, it was just the greedy loot goblin in me shining through once again. I was at least aware of this on some level, because I saved the Saigon's belt in the stash, just in case. And once again, while identifying the rest of the gear in town, it appeared that the rare item that I barely noticed was the real treasure. This sharkskin belt had over 50 life and some nice lightning resistance, and other good stats as well. This was a great belt for this barbarian, so I saved that in the stash as well and continued to wear gold wrap. I was determined to push on, but I was starting to struggle. I had to rely more and more on Emilio to take the heat, while I came in second and delivered pain onto our enemies. My lack of survivability was starting to become a pressing issue, and having no cool loot to show for playing through most of the act with the gold wrap on, I came to my senses and equipped the rare sharkskin belt before taking on the High Council in Travancore, making my life total shoot past 500, numbers I had never seen before on a life bulb. It didn't make me into a tank by any means, and we still had to draw the council out a few at a time, but I was starting to look more and more like a proper character. I used leap to jump through most of Mephisto's durance to avoid the awful mix of annoying enemies, and with 500 life and my very solid resistances, Mephisto himself was the easiest nightmare boss yet. For the first time in a while, I was able to face tank a strong enemy without having to retreat and heal all the time. I didn't even have to tag in Emilio, so he stayed alive for the entire fight as well. And this was really good news, since Nightmare Mephisto is a good target for some item grinding. Though there was a problem, my items were actually pretty good already. There was no piece of gear that was just terrible, so getting upgrades weren't going to be easy. But a little bit of grinding wasn't going to hurt, so I spent some time with Mephisto anyway, at least until something interesting dropped, and that for sure didn't happen on the quest kill. Something a little cheeky I could do was to use my good belt for the fight, and then when Mephisto had just 5 to 10% life left, I swapped to the gold wrap for the extra 30% magic find for the kill, and it felt nice to put the gold wrap to use after all. After finding a few very unimpressive items, I eventually found something that I liked. A green pair of gauntlets. Those are from the Saigon set, and while they aren't very impressive by themselves, I did have the Saigon's belt in my stash. And when combined, the gloves get a partial set bonus of 30% attack speed, and the set itself grants 10% lifesteal. The belt only gets a little bit of defense as a set bonus, but the base stats are pretty good on their own. I tried the set combination out for a while, but not for too long, because I found a shale rune from the Nightmare Hellforge. With that, I quickly went back to normal to use my quest reward from Larsek to add a socket to my Great Maul. And with a shale rune in the hammer, I didn't need the 30 attack speed from the Saigon's combo to attack faster, which allowed me to stick with the Crushing Blow gloves and the rare sharkskin belt to help with my survivability. But luckily, I saved the Saigon's pieces in the stash, and you'll see why I say that a little later. But a shale rune in the hammer was actually not the most significant upgrade before taking on Diablo, because while upgrading my hammer with a socket, I remembered that you can literally upgrade uniques. The Great Maul is a normal weapon, and I had the ingredients to upgrade it to an exceptional version, giving it much higher base damage, and look at those damage numbers, very nice. Nightmare difficulty so far can be summarized by me trying to solve all of my problems with a bigger hammer, and honestly, I was not disappointed. With my new hammer I obliterated every enemy in the Chaos Sanctuary. I did die another time, but this death really felt like it was not on me. I was trying to snipe some Oblivion Knights behind a big group of enemies. The plan didn't work out, but usually I could just leap away to safety and regroup. But this time leap completely bugged out on me, and I was just glitch jumping up and down in place instead of where I wanted to go, and then I got swarmed. That was pretty weird looking, and a complete and utter bullcrap way of dying if you ask me. But apart from that, I was able to clear out the sanctuary perfectly fine. Every fight was now very much feast or famine. If we took on too many enemies at once, we had no chance. But if we took on an amount we could manage, it was just as one-sided in the other direction. A seed was now planted in my mind. Was I going about this character the wrong way? I was trying so hard to become a tanky barbarian warrior who could just run in, debuff enemies with battle cry, and then wail down on enemies in melee combat. But without any vitality, my life pool was always going to be lagging behind. Perhaps there was a better way of playing this challenge. I continued as I had been for now, but this seed would eventually grow and change up my entire build once again. After activating the final seal, I took on Diablo, and he turned out to be kind of a pushover. He dropped sets and uniques when he fell, and the gloves were from the Immortal King set, a high-level set specifically for the Barbarian. The gloves on their own weren't that impressive, even if the 20 dexterity was kind of interesting for this character. I did not put them on, but I saved them in the stash in case I would find another piece from the set. And then the mace was Crush Flange, a low-level weapon that was not looking too hot so late into the game, but that high crushing blow stat made this item at least deserve a spot in my stash, just in case. It was clear to me that I was nowhere ready to take on hell, so in Act 5 of Nightmare I spent a fair bit of time with my old friend Eldritch, grinding him for several levels and hundreds of Ks of gold. While doing this I had two thoughts simmering in my mind. I was wondering if this was like Groundhog Day for Eldritch. Every day a barbarian with a big hammer comes and kills him while he's just chilling on his favorite summit. And no matter what he does, every day just repeats in the same pattern. And the second thing was that I kept questioning my build. I kept trying to build around damage mitigation and sustain in fights, by going for concentrate and prioritizing resistances, lifesteal and defense. But with no vitality and no blocking without a shield or dexterity, it felt to me like that was just not going to work out, especially not in Hell. And since the only thing that gave me real problems were big hordes of enemies, not single elite monsters, it became clear to me what I had to do. Once I finished grinding Eldritch, I was going to use my last remaining respec and fully embrace my glass cannon fate rather than fight against it. My new build was very similar to my old one, but instead of concentrate I went with Berserk, which has a higher damage modifier and converts all of your damage into magic damage. That is a double-edged sword, because while magic immunity is very rare, meaning I wouldn't struggle with resistant monsters as much in Hell, it also made all of my lifesteal useless since you can only leech from physical damage. Berserk also sets your defense to 0 for a short period of time, so this respec was definitely another instance of me trading survivability for more power. But there was an important reason for respecing like this, the synergies. Berserk has battle orders, which I would max anyway, and Howl as synergies. And a high level Howl was going to be a pillar of my new strategy, and once I'm done farming Eldritch for levels, I'll show you why I made this decision. And we'll also see if it was a good one or if I completely killed the run, I guess. But I was not done looting Eldritch. I found a pair of green greaves from him. These are the boots from the Saigon set, meaning the third piece from the set. The third piece didn't add much to the rest of the set compared to just wearing 2 pieces, but the boots themselves were quite nice. Movement speed and 40 resistances, as well as attack rating and magic find as set bonuses. I wasn't sure what I was going to wear yet since I had many options for the glove, belt and boot slots, but at least for the rest of the Eldritch farming session I wore these because of the added magic find. And then I found a unique Yari. My first thought was, hey, nice merc weapon, but that is one nice looking stick. Great damage, though not as great as my maul, but huge crushing blow and 3 open sockets for customization. And somewhat surprisingly, this spear did not have any dexterity requirement at all. Was I really going to give this to Emilio? Maybe I should use it. I had to think it over, but regardless, this was a great find. And only a few runs later I found a green Great Helm, another Saigon's piece. I couldn't remember exactly what this did in the moment, but while the Saigon's helm has awful inherent stats, it gives a huge bonus to attack rating per level as a set bonus. Wow. Equipping this doubled my attack rating thanks to all of the passive boosts, what an unexpectedly good find, and the attack rating boost was a 2-piece set bonus too, which would make it very easy to achieve regardless of what gear setup I chose later. I farmed Eldritch a lot and found a lot of other random loot as well that I haven't bothered showing in the video because it wasn't useful to me. But still, finding 4 pieces of one set was very lucky, especially one that was really good for me in this challenge as well. After this grind I was stronger than ever before, and thanks to the extra loot and levels I was now more accurate than ever before, making sure that the crazy amounts of damage that I dished out landed on its target. With the recent influx of gear I had a lot of options, so here's a quick overview of what I decided to use. I ended up using the Steel Driver and gave Honson down to Emilio. The spear was great, but I currently dealt so much damage that the crushing blow wasn't making a huge difference, which is kind of a weird thing to happen on a challenge run. Saigon's helm, and I just didn't see myself ever replacing this with a massive boost to attack rating, so I decided to socket it at Larsuk and put a rail into it for more fire resist. The crafted amulet would 14 to all resistances and more. The rare body armor that I had been using for quite some time now. This could certainly be upgraded, but it was still pretty good and I hadn't found anything better yet. Saigon's gloves for the set bonuses, a rare ring which could definitely be replaced. In the belt slot, the rare shark skin belt was back, mainly for the life and the lightning resistance. Another ring with even more lightning resistance, and finally Saigon's boots for some nice stats and set bonuses. I went from struggling in Act 4 to absolutely crushing everything in Act 5, a very nice change of pace. I was still weak defensively, but this is where my now high level Howl came in, causing every monster except elite enemies to run away in fear. This allowed me to take out elite enemies first or take out just a few enemies of a group at a time when combined with Taunt, or just run past enemies if I didn't feel like fighting. I mentioned this before how getting swarmed by lots of enemies was my main issue, while fighting just one or a few at a time was much more favorable, and Howl allowed me to make every encounter into such a favorable situation. The Ancients smashed. The Wallstone Keep passed. And the Throne Room Waves cheesed with Warcries. Needless to say, I had a great time in Act 5 of Nightmare, feeling like an actual hero for once. Unfortunately, that feeling was probably going to fade away as soon as I entered Hell, so I made sure to enjoy this while it lasted. I figured that the final wave with Lister was going to be a problem for me since they are immune to most form of crowd control, including Howl. But where my shouts failed, my hammer remained a working solution, and they all went down in just a few hits. And then after the shortest Nightmare Bale fight I've had in a long time, I jumped straight into the final difficulty of the game, Hell. I was certainly still strong and my Howl tactic still worked, but due to monsters dealing much higher damage there was a lot less room for error in Hell, especially with the severe resistance penalty from Hell on top. Every battle against elites had to be approached tactically and I had to be extra careful around any ranged enemies, but with that being said, for the start of Hell I was strong enough to keep going, and my damage was certainly good enough. When I started out as a strength-only Barbarian, this playstyle was not really what I anticipated, but to be honest I found it quite fun to play this way. It turned out that the solution to having low life was to just not get hit by too much at once, and kill enemies so quickly that they didn't get a chance to attack me. It could of course happen still that I ran into several elites at once, and it was not like Hell was trivial. But even in those situations, having a max level Howl to turn away the small minions made kiting hard elite packs a lot more manageable. The respec to Berserk and Howl was definitely looking like the right choice for this character. And just so he gets proper credit, even with all the war cries to separate and debuff enemies, I could still not tank most enemies. I had to either kite them or let Emilio tank for me while I swung my hammer from a few steps back. I've been flashing my big damage numbers for the video, but I really couldn't have been playing like this without Emilio, so a big shout out to him. And sometimes my high damage was my downfall. I took down even elite enemies in just a few hits, sometimes even one-shotting them, which did feel awesome to be fair. But in chaotic fights I didn't always manage to read elites' abilities before I killed them, causing me to die a few times to elemental enchanted enemies' death explosions. My damage was simply too high for my own good. I made steady progress through Act 1, hunting down all elite enemies I found in hopes of good loot, even going through some optional areas, which I am almost never brave enough to do in most challenge runs. We made it to Andariel, and while trying to clear out the area of her minions, I accidentally moved too close and grabbed their attention. It was not a good idea for me to fight her at the same time as a bunch of random enemies, but I managed to bring both her and Emilio into the other room, close the door behind us and clear out the few monsters that joined us. Then after me and Emilio took a toast in antidotes, we took on Andariel for the final time. I could not handle her damage at all, and neither could Emilio really, but he held out a little longer than I did, so I used every potion I had on him. Health potions, full rejuvenations, and even the odd extra antidote. Since we dealt so much damage between my big hammer and Emilio's crushing blow spear jabs, we managed to take her down before my potions ran out. Honestly, not at all as bad as I expected. Andariel dropped a unique ring, and this was probably the best ring I could have hoped for, Ravenfrost. This was just the perfect ring for this character. The attack rating and dexterity translated to over 2000 more attack rating after my bonuses, and the ring has cannot be frozen, meaning that I could once again no longer be slowed by cold damage, something which had been a major nuisance so far in Hell. 20 cold absorb would also help against cold damage as well. Simply a 10 out of 10 ring. When it comes to loot, this Barbarian was truly blessed. In Act 2 I continued the same way I did in Act 1, only that enemies were more dangerous now. Every single fight was a dance around incoming damage. I couldn't take on any fair fights at all and relied solely on creating unfair ones, sniping elite monsters and others who stood in my way, and then moved on, leaving the terrified normal monsters behind. I encountered my first magic immune enemies in Act 2, to which my Berserk attack would do absolutely nothing. Luckily I had a level 1 concentrate, which I had skilled as a prerequisite for Berserk, and that dealt more than enough damage to take the mummies down once I had scared off all their minions. And somewhat surprisingly, there is not much else to tell from my adventures in Act 2. It was hard, it was grindy, but it was totally doable and it was not very eventful. With that being said, when I had to defeat a lot of enemies, like in the tombs, it took a really long time to fight through this way. Howl could only scare monsters away so far when indoors, and whenever I tried to pass through enemies, I was quickly reminded of my flimsy defenses. And then Duriel, who was far easier than the road to reach him. His Holy Freeze aura could somehow slow me down, despite my Ravenfrost supposedly making me immune to that effect. But we countered by having thawing potions and health potions, and before long he was defeated and we moved on to Act 3. Act 3 was another ramp up in difficulty with more incoming damage and lots of fast enemies, giving me even less room for error in engagements. I had taken down a lot of elite monsters but avoided fighting much else so far in Hell. I was starting to fall behind on levels again, and I also ran low on gold from having to spend so much on reviving Emilio. So before taking on the jungle, I went back to the mausoleum in Act 1 for a quick farming session for golden experience. And, you know, the chance for another lucky item drop. I didn't end up finding any cool loot, but with more golds and a few extra levels, we pushed on through Act 3. It was perfectly doable, but after spending some time in the easy mausoleum in Act 1, I was making mistakes which I couldn't afford, like underestimating the power of elites with nasty stat combinations or staying too long in fights before trying to retreat. I don't do many of my challenges in hardcore, but even in softcore I try to avoid dying as much as possible and not use death as a resource or strategy to power through, but for this character, dying every now and then was inevitable, at least when I was playing it. In the Durance of Hate, I ran into a lot of the infamous dolls. I wanted to see if I could even survive one hit from them and survive, and I could, but it was not by much. I ended up using a lot of my full rejuvenation potions going through here, panic drinking every potion when I saw my life bar dropped in an instant. Using Howl, I avoided the rest of them as much as I could, and the few elites I ran into I let Emilio handle, because I was certain that the explosion from an elite doll would one-shot me. But then once again, with high single target damage from my maul and lots of crushing blow from Emilio, we were able to quickly dispose of the act boss after struggling a lot to get there. The difficulty of the game isn't really linear, even if the scaling of enemies is. Enemies certainly keep getting harder and harder as you progress, but your character's development does not follow the same pattern but often comes in bursts instead. An important skill unlock, a change of skill build or a big item drop can make you shoot past parts of the game, even if you were struggling so hard in the earlier parts. Now this character was perhaps extra special in this regard, as his big unlock was to change to a strategy where he purposely avoided a lot of enemies, which I guess can be considered a bit cheesy, but if I could clubber down an act boss in under a minute, I could kill anything the game threw at me. I just chose not to because it was such a slow and tedious process to clear entire areas while fighting only a few enemies at a time, having to chase down enemies all over the map after scaring them away with Howl. But with great crowd control and great damage, this character was now stronger than ever before, and he continued his crusade through Hell. It was not all smooth sailing, but every situation we found ourselves in could be solved by crowd control and target fire. The Chaos Sanctuary was extremely annoying. The Oblivion Knight's curses made them a priority target in any encounter, but they are immune to Howl and Taunt, and they like to run away as soon as you approach them, which made them hard to hunt down. The solution was to channel every bit of patience and slowly clear out the entire area just a few enemies at a time, hoping to isolate the lone Oblivion Knight and otherwise use Howl and Taunt to drag 2 or 3 enemies away from the rest. Then rinse and repeat. It wasn't necessarily the hardest thing to do, but it was very grindy, and it took a long time to get through to the Seal Guardians and summon Diablo. Diablo can dish out some serious damage, but by standing right on top of him I could dodge his lightning attack, and with Battle Cry active I could take a few of his claws. His Firestorm was deadly though, and I had to immediately run away whenever he used it. But I didn't have to endure the fight for long, as once again my damage proved to be too much for the Lord of Terror. Diablo dropped a unique gothic plate, Rattle Cage. I would have loved to use this for the crushing blow, but I couldn't really give up the lightning and fire resistance from my current armor. Emilio's armor was pretty bad though, so another upgrade for him I guess. Emilio now had 70% crushing blow, which would help a lot against big tanky enemies. Not that that was really that needed here, since each of my swings dealt 2,000 to 3,000 magic damage already, but it was still a very potent mercenary setup. After an early death in the final act, I had to stop for one more gold grind to secure Emilio's future. I had stopped to grind so many times in this challenge already, but I just couldn't tackle the end of the game alone. And I'm no stranger to the grind, I actually enjoy playing this way, moving fast until I run into a problem, and then try to solve my problems as they appear, either via grinding or otherwise. During this final grind I had a very unexpected drop, a unique gilded shield, a great item for the wrong character. Herald of Saccharum has some absolutely crazy stats, both offensively and defensively, but it is only usable by the Paladin, so I couldn't even wear it if I wanted to. I knew a Paladin who might appreciate it though.
I know much about the ancient religions. I was trained as a Paladin of Saccharum.
Not even 10k gold for this rarity was definitely a ripoff, but what else was I gonna do with it? Farah really knew how to haggle. I howled my way through the rest of the act as quickly as possible. I took on minimal encounters with my aim set for the remaining 3 major obstacles of Hell: the Ancients, Bale's minion in the throne room, and then Bale himself. The Ancients were tricky because I had to keep an eye out for all 3 of them since they had the potential to deal a lot of damage to me quickly, but together with Emilio as a distraction I was able to bonk them all down. Bale's Minions. Slow and Steady was the name of the game, and I have to say it was surprisingly safe. Wave 2 was super annoying, but by pulling enemies out 1 or 2 at a time with Taunt to avoid their healing and resurrection, and then using my level 1 concentrate together with Emilio to kill off the magic immune ones, we made it through. Lister and the final wave were a problem as usual, but as has become my standard strategy for defeating them by now, I kited his pack back through the corridor to draw them apart, and once isolated, 1 or 2 minions of destruction were no match for us, not even Lister. And then finally, Bale. I owe a big thanks to Emilio with his Hones on Dawn and Rattle Cage for providing tons of crushing blow for this fight, because Bale's life pool in hell is absolutely massive. After just a handful of pokes with his spear, Bale was down to just a fraction of his life, and what little remained was no match for a big hammer wielded by a very strong man. This ended up being quite a weird playthrough. It was harder than I expected it to be, and I died a lot throughout the run. Though I guess I shouldn't be surprised, considering my melee Barbarian had no vitality and put every single stat point into strength, which ended up at a total of 425 by the way, a pretty healthy number. The playstyle of Howl and Berserk was very fun while it was novel, but it quickly became old and one-dimensional once we got deeper into Hell. But at least we made it through, and with the final boss of Hell defeated, the challenge was completed. A big shout out to Howl for making this run possible, and an equally big shout out to all the supporters on YouTube and Twitch who never run away in fear when I scream. Here's another grindy challenge run, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.